You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Folks, happy Friday. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my program, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. And you can watch the simulcast in video over on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Come on over and join the live chat room, which is already engaged and already going. And enjoy the time there with the other Intrep heads. Thank you for coming to the program tonight. And before I get started, I just want to say, do you have your Intrepid radio program coffee mug yet? I do. It's filled with hot coffee right now. There it is. It's got the Buck Rogers style rocket emblazoned all over it. And our original, back when we did not radio, but back in 2011 when we launched Intrepid magazine, boldly going was our original catchphrase, if you will, our tag. And so we've got that on the mug. So get your coffee mug. You can find it over at my Etsy page, and I'll type it into the chat room. That's etsy.com/shop/sonofapatriot. And you can find all kinds of other things there. I just ordered a few shirts myself. I ordered the David shirt from the old David series that we did. And also, what was the other one I ordered? Oh, my Celtic Pride shirt. Those are coming. And so go over, take a look through, see what all we've got. Avail yourself of some great products. Great t-shirt designs, coffee mugs, and stuff like that. So thanks for coming over tonight to the show. We're going to pick up where we left off. And we're talking about, of course, this whole idea of the king, the warrior, the magician, the lover. These issues about what is the true masculine male. Not what society has set up masculinity to mean over the last few decades. You notice how terms, when it comes to politics and politicking and political correctness, have changed over the years. Well, that is what has happened to the term masculine or masculinity. Macho is a little different, you know. That's something quite different than mature masculinity. And so that's what we're looking at. And we were looking at yesterday about the loss of fathers, which equates to the loss of ritual in a boy's life. Now you can take all this information and extrapolate it over to girls and women as well. Now, I believe in a strong family unit. I believe that kids need mom and dad both to develop into a mature adult. And I think dads especially need to mentor their sons, and moms need to mentor their daughters. And then they do things together as well. But women need to see how to be women from their moms, and boys need to see how to be men from their dads. And then they learn the opposite from the opposite parent when they're all doing the things, the nurturing, the growing, the teaching all together. And so a good rounded family, and those things are hard to find nowadays. And of course, with the desire to merge the sexes, to blend everything together, that everything is one big soup, and it doesn't matter if you have a dad or a mom or both or neither. Everybody is born, according to Jung, and which I adhere to, everybody is born with this innate personality, the thing that makes them up in life. I am who I am today because of who I was born as. Now, the outside stimuli are the things that affect the way I operate. sometimes we have to go back to those modes that were set a long time ago when we were kids if something was awry or askew or didn't happen right. In my own case, without having a dad around, there were things that I did, and I recognized as I got a little older that I wanted to become, that I wanted to be. I remember we had difficulties, and I mentioned this before, difficulties getting pregnant early on. And I thought, great, I'm never going to have kids. And I started to think fatalistically, maybe I'm not going to be a good parent. Maybe it's because I didn't have a good dad at home. I'll never be a good dad. And so when my wife became pregnant, my ex-wife, I remember she was pregnant, and I made a vow at that time. I said, I vow I will never be an absentee dad or an absentee father. And the product of that particular first pregnancy was my twin daughters, Abby and Bryn, who are today 28 years old. They're entrepreneurs. They run their own business. They're in their 9th year. And I actually do take a lot of credit for being the dad that raised them that way. Now, I'm not as successful as they are if you count success by dollars, and certain accomplishments in life. They're light years ahead of me with their business. But I tried to instill in them a love of their creative streak, a love of doing things for themselves, a love of self-sufficiency, and of course the business acumen such as I possessed at the time. So I was more like, to them in business, I was like a freelance artist encouraging my daughters in their art, and they took that to the next level, way the next level. And so all that to say, moms and dads are necessary. Now, I also find it interesting that these shows that I do, that I entitle things like Missing Fathers, Missing Rituals, that those get less views on the night of the show. I don't know if that topic is something that frightens people, scares them away, or maybe there are some who don't think they need to hear anything about masculinity and what true masculinity is all about, that don't need to hear what fathers are supposed to be. I happen to know from experience in working with dads in troubled marriages and homes and breaking homes many years ago, that guys who are not being dads at home, many times if they don't have a change of heart toward it and find that they need to do something better than they're doing, that those are guys that will avoid this kind of stuff. They don't want to hear it. So guys, if you're here and you're listening to this, men I'm speaking to specifically here, thanks for being here. I congratulate you for coming and wanting to know something, wanting to know what's being said. Even if you disagree with me, that's okay. I'm glad you're here wanting to experience what we're talking about. Women, same for you. Talking about guys. Maybe you have a husband or a dad or a father or a son that needs to hear these things, or that you want to hear to get a better understanding of how they are wired. I appreciate your being here. And so yesterday, we left off with talking about how all the archetypical patterns that have gone awry, that have skewed into negatives by disastrous encounters with living people in the outer world around us, that is, in most cases, by inadequate or hostile parents. They manifest in our lives as crippling psychological problems. Now, parents that... I can say there are times we all sit back. I sit back and I go, man, I did that wrong. I shouldn't have done that with my kid that way. Maybe I should have reprimanded differently. Maybe I jumped too fast to punishment and discipline before I imposed understanding. Now, I'm not talking about being weak and feeble and going, oh, I understand the reason that you scratched artwork on the side of the Mercedes with a rock. And sometimes you got to sit down and you got to work through some of those. It's like I look at my kid pounding nails into the end table, and I'll go, what are you doing? And the response from them is kind of a blank stare, like, is this a trick question? I'm pounding nails into the why, that's what I'm doing, Father. Well, that's wrong, and let me tell you why. Let me tell you something about the furniture and about pounding nails into it, or cutting holes in the $3,000 sofa set, or something like that, you know. And so all of those things, we all have stuff where we second guess who we are. But when I'm talking about things going awry, is dads that aren't there, dads that have checked out, dads whose jobs are more important than their kids and their wife, dads who absolutely leave and abandon their wife and kids because they think there's something better out there. And they want to leave all their options open. And so this is what I'm addressing. And Dr. Winnicott had said, if our parents were, as he says, good enough, then we're enabled to experience and access the inner blueprints for the human relations in positive ways and the ways we bring up our kids. Sadly, many of us, maybe even the majority of us in our society here in the West, didn't receive good enough parenting. Now, this is perhaps an indictment of the way we parent. But when you say the majority of people out there possibly didn't receive good enough parenting, just look at the last couple of decades, and that's really where my focus has been on that statement. Last 2 to 3 decades, where find yourself, be yourself. The most important thing to be is happy with yourself. And so if happiness takes you away from your family, then pursue your happiness to be a better person. What a bunch of unmitigated bullshit. As I heard one psychologist put it, a popular radio host, say, when you become a parent, you sacrifice certain things because you are now no longer a single person out there checking out your options. You are a husband. You are a wife. You are a parent to kids, especially when you add kids in that mix. Yeah, there's things you can do. There's adventures to pursue. There's excitement to do. But you know what? Sometimes you have to put a stop to that, because when you have children, you enter into a new phase of sacrificing who you wanted to be, what you wanted to be, because now you've created new life that you are responsible for instilling maturity into, mentoring into the world. That's really only a handful of years, folks, that we have to do that. And as they get older, then we go back into some of the other things we want to do. Sometimes there is sacrifice that is good sacrifice. I hear from many moms, my own wife sometimes, look at all the things I've sacrificed and I left behind because you got me pregnant. No, I'm not. That's not an indictment against my wife. That's just the way it all comes out sometimes. And I have to remind her, hey, there were 2 of us there, making whoopee, as they say, and we created these kids. Thing is, moms have sometimes a more monumental task than dads. How many dads can walk away from a pregnant woman versus a woman can't walk away from a pregnancy? She can end it, she can terminate it, and all that. That's a totally different discussion, but that's like the only option a mom has: terminate that or live with it. And so the dads, they get to walk away scot-free sometimes, and they don't have to be the dad that is there and present. And this has taken its toll in our society. So when we say there's not good enough parenting, good enough, that's where I'm hailing to. That's where my focus is. So the existence of archetypes is well documented by mountains of clinical evidence from the dreams and the daydreams of all the patients that go to see psychotherapists or psychologists about these things. And it's from careful observation of entrenched patterns of human behavior. You yourselves, you can look to your own lives. You can look to the people around you. You can observe and you can learn from those things. It's also documented by in-depth studies of mythology the world over. again and again and again, over and over again, we see the same essential figures appearing in folklore and mythology. And these just happen to appear also in the dreams of people who have no knowledge of these fields. The dying, resurrecting young god, for example, is found in the myth books that are amongst diverse people as Christians, Muslims, Persians, ancient Sumerians, modern Native Americans, as well as in the dreams of those undergoing psychotherapy. And so the evidence is great that there are underlying patterns that determine human cognitive and emotional life. These patterns have been with us since the inception of human civilization. And so these blueprints appear to be in great number. They manifest themselves as both male and female. And there are archetypes that pattern the thoughts and the feelings and relationships of women. And there are archetypes that pattern the thoughts, feelings, and relationships of men. And in addition, people who adhere to kind of a Jungian philosophy of psychology have found that in every man there is a feminine sub-personality called the anima, made up of the feminine archetypes. And in every woman, there's a masculine sub-personality called the animus, made up of the masculine archetypes. And all human beings can access the archetypes to a greater or lesser degree. And we do this, in fact, in our interrelating with one another. Now, while that may sound that it flies in the face of me saying there is no feminine in masculine, there is no masculine in femininity, there are archetypes that we can hail to, those sub-animus and anima that are beneath the surface. And the whole field of being is being actively discussed over and over again and researched and studied, and it's revised our knowledge about instinctual human worlds and how they move forward. And we're just beginning to sort out in a very systematic way the inner human world that's always manifested itself in us in myth, in ritual, in dreams, in visions. And the field of archetypical psychology is still pretty much in its infancy. And we look to these things and want to show men how they can access these positive archetype potentials. Same with women. And for all their own benefit, for the benefit of all those around them, maybe even for the planet itself. And so one of these things I want to start looking at is boy psychology. So there's the drug dealer, the ducking and diving political leader, the wife beater, the chronically crabby boss, the hotshot junior executive, the unfaithful philandering husband, the company yes man, the indifferent graduate school advisor, the holier-than-thou minister, the gang member, the father who can never find the time to attend his own daughter's school programs, the coach who ridicules his star athletes, the therapist who unconsciously attacks his clients, shining, and seeks a kind of gray normalcy for them, the yuppie, as we used to call them. That's an old term now, folks. You know what a yuppie was. That term really came out in the 80s. We used to call them dinks, dual income, no kids, D-I-N-K, dual income, no kids. These are all these kinds of men have something in common. They're all boys pretending to be men. Get that? All of these different archetypes are boys pretending to be men. They got that way, honestly, because nobody showed them what a mature man is supposed to be like. Or they got a false model of what a mature male is supposed to be. Their kind of manhood is a pretense to manhood. It goes largely undetected as such by most of us. And we're continually mistaking some man's controlling, threatening, hostile behaviors as strength. and in reality showing an underlying extreme vulnerability and weakness, and the vulnerability of the wounded boy. Now, I don't want to get sing-songy with this. Say, oh, you're just abusive because deep down there is a hurt child. It's not so much that, not getting in touch with your inner child, as we've watered it down to mean. But there is a wounded boy and a wound that's inflicted either by pain, abuse, by bad role modeling. All these are wounds that make men what they are today when they are in that category of really the immature male. We look at some captains of industry who are threatening, hostile, cruel. It's a caricature even of itself. But those are things that are inflicted on these people much younger in their lives. And they never passed out of being a boy into being a man except in physical maturity alone. They don't have the emotional and mental maturity to become a man. And the devastating fact is that most men are fixated at immature levels of development. These early developmental levels are governed by the inner blueprints appropriate to boyhood, but not to manhood. And when they're allowed to rule what should be adulthood, when the archetypes of boyhood are not built up and transcended by ego's appropriate assessing of the archetypes of mature masculinity, they cause us to act out of our hidden, to us but seldom to others, boyishness. And we often talk with affection about boyishness in our culture. And the truth, we look at the Peter Pan syndrome, the boy who never wanted to grow up. The truth is that the boy in each of us men, when he's in the appropriate place in our lives, is the source of playfulness, of pleasure, of fun, of energy, of a kind of open-mindedness that's ready for adventure and for the future. But there's another kind of boyishness that remains infantile in our interactions with ourselves and with others when manhood is required. And this, guys, especially, is what I want you to hear and what I want you to listen to. We're going to get into now the structure of the archetypes. Each of the archetypical energy potentials in the male psyche, in both its immature and its mature forms, has a triune, a three-part structure. There's a triangle, and at the top of the triangle is the archetype in its fullest. At the bottom of the triangle is the archetype experienced in what we call a bipolar, dysfunctional, or shadow form. In both its immature and mature forms, that is, in both boy psychology and man psychology, in those terms, this bipolar dysfunction can be thought of as immature in that it represents a psychological condition that's not integrated or cohesive. Lack of cohesion in the psyche is always a symptom of inadequate development. And as the personality of the boy and then the man matures into its appropriate stage of development, the poles of these shadows form and they become integrated and unified. And this is the thing that we have to pay attention to, because many times some people can notice it outwardly, but these are things inwardly that we don't always realize we've missed. This integration of shadow with maturity. Remember back to when we were talking a couple of days ago about Jungian's psyche, the development of the psyche in the shadow, the things that are kept underneath. Sometimes those things are good when they are integrated into the mature. So some boys seem more mature than others. They're accessing, no doubt, unconsciously the archetypes of boyhood more fully than their peers. And these boys have achieved a level of integration and inner unity that others have not. And it extends into the mature male. And we got to end this first segment. We're going to be back after this break. Folks, you sit tight. We'll be right back. right, gang, thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. We're back with the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. You can come over and watch the simulcast video along with the live chat room going on right now at my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. We're talking about boy psychology that goes into male, mature man psychology. We're talking about the structure of the archetypes. And I had mentioned before we went out that some boys, when they're boys, they seem more mature than others. And they're accessing these unconscious archetypes of boyhood, some more fully than other boys, than their peers. And these boys have achieved a level of integration and inner unity that others may have not. And other boys might seem more immature, even taking into account the natural immaturity of boyhood. For example, it's right for a boy to feel the heroic within himself. Boys are wired to be heroes. That's why we always warn in adult males with their wives and their partners, stop being the white knight all the time. It's because that's a thing from boyhood we've brought up. Have you ever noticed, guys, women, you already know this, when a woman comes to you and she's upset about something, she wants to unload on you, she wants to tell you what her day was. Like most guys, because we have the heroic wired into us, we want to be the white knight coming in on the white steed. We want to save the day. Well, honey, I know exactly what your problem is and why it's affecting you that way. Let me help you solve that. When in reality, they don't want us to solve anything. Sometimes they just want us to be there as their mature mate and hear them out and listen to them. That's a tough one for me. It took me a very long time with that in my relationship. Even now, my wife will come to me with something, and I'll sit with a blank stare and like a doe in the headlights and listen, and I go, my brain immediately goes to, well, let me tell you how to solve that problem. And she's like, I'm not asking you to solve it. I want to tell you about it. And so, the mature male. We'll get into that some more as we go on. But boys see themselves as heroes. They identify with the heroic. I did when I was a kid. I identified with the heroes that I saw. You know, and I because I didn't have a dad in the home, I didn't see him as a hero because I didn't know him. But I used as a surrogate the Tinseltown, the Hollywood heroes. Those were the things that drew my attention. Especially, as many of you know, Captain Kirk. Star Trek was a big hero, and I wanted so much to be him. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to have his attributes. I even, at times, wanted to talk like him. You know, there were things I wanted to do. I wanted to be, because I saw that heroic and I identified with it in myself. I wanted to see myself as that hero. That is a natural boy tendency. But some boys, by the way, do that with sports heroes. I want to be just like that football quarterback or that baseball home run hitter or whatever. I'm using very general terms rather than names. But many boys can't do this, and they become really caught in the bipolar shadow forms of the hero. The grandstander, the bully, the coward. These are shadow forms of the heroic that we fall into as boys. And different archetypes come online at different developmental ages and stages. The first archetype of the immature masculine is to power up. And that's the divine child, it's called. The precocious child and the Oedipal child are next. So the divine child, the precocious child, the Oedipal child. Oedipal, 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 going back to the legend of Oedipus. And if you don't know that, look it up quick. We'll describe it as we go. But the last stage of boyhood is governed by the hero. The human development doesn't always proceed so neatly, of course. And there are these mixtures of the archetypical influences all along the way. They go from the divine child to the precocious child to the Oedipal child to the hero. Now, interestingly, each of the archetypes of boy psychology gives rise in a very complex way to each of the archetypes of mature masculinity. The boy is father to the man. Thus, the divine child, modulated and enriched by life's experiences, becomes the king. The precocious child becomes the magician. The edible child, O-edible, O-E-D, not edible like tasty, but Oedipal, Oedipus child, becomes the lover. And the hero becomes the warrior. These are those 4 pillars of masculinity that we talked about at the very beginning. The king, the magician, the lover, the warrior. And so these are the things that we become out of these 4 archetypes. And the 4 archetypes of boyhood, each with a triangular structure, think of a pyramid, can be put together to form a pyramid that depicts the structure of the boy's emerging identity. Now, I don't have graphics to show you. I could take graphics and flash them up there, but of course our audience on the radio doesn't get to see those. And that's never stopped me from graphics before, but part of it is maybe I just didn't draw up the diagrams for this. But let me describe them. They have this triangular structure. And the immature masculine self, that really show the immature masculine self as it grows. And the same is true of the structure of the mature masculine, the self. And as I've suggested, the adult man does not lose his boyishness, and the archetypes that form boyhood's foundation never go away. But since the archetypes cannot disappear, the mature man transcends the masculine powers of boyhood, building upon them rather than demolishing them, the resulting structure of the mature masculine. Therefore, it's a pyramid kind of over a pyramid, covering that old pyramid up. It's contained inside. And again, there are imagery I could put with this, but let's just describe them. There's the divine child. The first, the most primal of the immature masculine energies is the divine child. Now, this is an archetype. We're all familiar with the Christian story of the birth of baby Jesus. He's a mystery. He comes from the divine realm, born of a virgin woman. Now, this is according to, of course, I have to use the term again, literalist Orthodox Christianity. Kind of looking past the mystery religions, we're looking to this as an archetype, the divine child. He's born of a virgin woman. Miraculous things and events attend him. The star shines over his place of birth. The worshiping shepherds, the wise men from Persia. Surrounded by all these worshipers, he occupies the central place, not only in the stable in the nativity scene, but in the universe. Even the animals and popular Christmas songs attend him. In the pictures, he radiates light. He's haloed by the soft glistening straw he lies upon, because, according to Christianity, he's God. He's almighty. And at the same time, he's totally vulnerable and helpless. He's an infant. So no sooner is he born than the evil King Herod sniffs him out and seeks to kill him in the story. The wise men come to him and he says, "Oh, there's somebody claiming to be the king of the Jews, eh? Well, how about you go find him, come back and report to me so I can go worship him." And what Herod was saying in the story was, really, I want to go kill him. And when the Magi never returned to him because the angels warned them not to, what did Herod do? It says that he went out and he slew all baby boys 2 years and under, as the story goes. So the divine child has to be protected. and spirited away to Egypt until he can be strong enough to begin his life's work, and until the forces that would destroy him have spent their energy. We've seen that story played out in mythology and legend and fiction over and over again. The child who must be protected by the mentor, by the old elder who hides him away and teaches him things. Even when we talked once about the Song of Hiawatha, the poem written by Longfellow, and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, yes, and how that he was taught by old Nokomis, and until he was strong enough to become the savior archetype. Native American stories. So what's not often realized is that this myth of the divine child doesn't stand alone. The religions of the world are rich with stories of the miraculous baby boy. The Christian story itself is modeled in part on the story of the birth of the great Persian prophet Zoroaster. This is where you get into the mystery religions now. It's complete with miracles in nature, magi, threats on his life. In Judaism, there's the story of the baby Moses, born to be the deliverer of his people, to be the great teacher and the mediator between God and the humans. And he was raised as a prince in Egypt. And yet in his first days, his life was threatened by an edict from the Pharaoh because the Hebrew slaves had grown too numerous. And his life was threatened by an edict. And he was placed helpless and vulnerable in a reed basket and set adrift on the Nile, I think just placed in the reeds amongst the Nile, where the young princess would see him while she was bathing. We all know that story. I've covered that several times in my own work. And so the model for this story was the much older legend of the infancy of the great Mesopotamian king Sargon of Akkad. And from all over the world we hear legends about the wondrous infancy of the baby Buddha, and the baby Krishna, the baby Dionysus. And even less known is that this figure of the divine baby boy, universal in our religions and our mythologies, is also universal inside ourselves. This can be seen from the dreams of men in psychoanalysis. They frequently, especially as they start to get better, dream about a baby boy who fills the dream with light and joy and the sense of wonder and refreshment. And often, too, when a man in therapy starts to feel better as he's going through his therapy, the urge comes to him, perhaps for the first time in his life, to have kids. I must have a son. I remember I talked about how we couldn't have kids, and then we found out my wife was pregnant. And even though I couldn't have kids, I was just joyful to be able to have children, to father children. Before we knew the sex of the babies, I was like, oh my God, I hope it's a boy. I'm a guy. I wanted a boy. I wanted that divine boy child. That's what's in us. And of course, it was 2 girls. And even up until almost the time of birth, it's Abby. We could see that she was a girl in all the ultrasounds and stuff. But Bryn was transverse, and her hip areas were hidden by my wife's pelvic bone. And so we could never tell what she was until she came out. Oh, it's another girl. And I was, of course, just fine with that. And then I had a son 9 years later, my son Sam. Now I have 2 sons, my son Flynn, through Rainey. And I have 2 more girls. So I got 4 girls and 2 boys. So I got my boys out of the way. It's something that all men want to have. These divine children, these golden children. And so these events are signals that something new, creative, fresh, and innocent is being born out of us. And so a new phase of life is beginning. Creative parts of himself, of the man that have been unconscious, are now thrusting upward into awareness. He's experiencing new life. But whenever the divine child within us makes itself known, attack from the Herods, the metaphoric Herods within and without, isn't far behind. New life, including new psychological life, is always fragile. And when we feel this new energy manifesting within us, We need to move to protect it. We become the protectors of our divine children. And that's because it's going to be attacked, and we know that. A man might say in his therapy, I may actually be getting better. And right away he may be answered by an inner voice that says, oh, no, you're not. You know you can never be well. You know you can never get better. And it's then time to get the fragile divine child to Egypt. Excuse me. Scratchy throat. So, which I've had for 20 years. So, we've been through that before. So, pardon me if I don't have the right... I got to turn down my sound to mute when I'm in this format. So, pardon me for that. So, picking up on the theme in the Christmas story of the adoring animals and the angels, their proclamations of peace on earth, goodwill to men, we can see in the Greek myth of Orpheus that the divine child is the archetypical energy that prefigures the mature masculine energy of the king. The man-god Orpheus sits and at the center of the world playing his lyre and singing a song that brings all the animals of the forest to him. As one of the old John Denver songs once said, one of his more obscure songs, is something, Orpheus taught me to play was one of the lines. Andromeda casts down her sign and Vega lights the way. So, Orpheus, the old legend. So he sits at the center, plays his lyre, draws all animals to him. And they're drawn by the song, prey and predator. And they come together around Orpheus in perfect harmony. Their differences resolved, all of the opposites brought together into a world-transcending order, characteristic functions of the king, as we're going to see when we get to the king archetype. But this theme of the divine child, bringing peace and order to the world, the whole world, including the animal world, and animals looked at psychologically stand for our own often conflicting instincts, is not limited to ancient myth. A young man who had entered analysis once told his therapist that he had this unusual event in his childhood. When he was probably 5 or 6 years old, he went out into his backyard one spring, learning for something he was too young to identify, but that upon reflection later in life he saw was a yearning for inner peace and harmony and a sense of oneness with all things. Even children seek these things by nature. They are in us. And he stood with his back to a huge oak tree, which grew in his yard, and he began to sing a song he made up as he went along. It was hypnotic for him, this 6-year-old boy. And he sang his longing, he sang his sadness, and he sang of a kind of minor key, deep joy. He sang a song of compassion for all living things, as maybe only a 6-year-old can vocalize those things. And it was a kind of self and other soothing lullaby, a song to the baby boy. And pretty soon he began to notice that birds were coming to the tree, a few at a time. He continued singing, and as he sang, more birds came, whirling and circling around the tree and alighting at its branches. At last, the tree was filled with birds, and it was alive with them. It seemed to him that they'd been lured by his beauty and the compassion of his song. That's how he saw that as a 6-year-old. They confirmed his beauty, and they answered his yearning by coming to, as he thought, adore him. And the tree becomes a tree of life, and it's refreshed by this confirmation of his inner divine child. He could go on. And that was his story from the perspective of a 6-year-old. Now, the divine child archetype that appears in our myths as Orpheus, as Christ, as the infant Moses, as the various figures and myths of many religions, in the dreams of men undergoing therapy, and in the actual experiences of boys, appears to be in the hard wiring of us all. We're born with this stuff. It's like Jung said, we are born as we are and as we will always be. We just augment that from experience. And it goes by many names. It's elevated or evaluated differently by the different schools of psychology. And usually psychologists condemn it. And in effect, they try to disconnect their child or their client from their childhood archetypes. And the important thing is to see that the divine child is built into us. It's a primal pattern of the immature masculine. Now, Freud talked about it as the id and the it. And he saw it as the primitive, the infantile, the drives, the amoral, the forceful, the full of godlike pretentiousness of children, of the immature. Godlike pretentiousness. Do you know some people that are supposed to be mature males that have this godlike pretentiousness? It was the underlying push of the impersonal nature itself. And it was concerned only with satisfying the unlimited needs of the child. Got to take a sip of coffee to wet my throat. So the psychologist Alfred Adler, and by the way, Freud and Adler, and not Jung, Freud and Adler are the two psychologists, the fathers of modern psychology that I hailed to in my book on the reptilians. It would talk about different aspects of why we need certain mythologies and archetypes in our life. And Adler talked about it as the hidden power drive in each one of us, as the hidden superiority complex that covers our real sense of vulnerability, our weakness and inferiority. As Freud said, we have to look back at things. Adler said we need to look forward and pull ourselves forward out of our weaknesses and inferiorities. Now remember, the divine child is both all-powerful, the center of the universe, and at the same time totally helpless and weak. In fact, this is the actual experience of infants. I've many times joked about my youngest child, who is now 5 years old, Ellery. She is the queen, undisputed queen of the universe. Just not come into her fullness yet. But she's so vulnerable at the same time. She's precocious, she's headstrong, she's the queen of the universe. Yet, she can skin her knee and come running to dad and mom and need help. So Heinz Kohut, who developed what he called self-psychology, talks about it as the grandiose self-organization, which is demanding of ourselves and others in ways that can never be fulfilled, this grandiose self-organization. And the most recent psychoanalytic theory suggests that people who are possessed by or identified with this infantile grandiosity are expressing a narcissistic personality disorder. And the followers of Carl Jung, however, view this divine child very differently. They don't see it in a largely pathological term. Jungians believe that the divine child is a vital aspect of the archetypical self. The self with a capital S. Because it's different from the ego, which is the self with a small s. For Jungians, the divine child within us is the absolute source of life for us. It possesses magical, empowering qualities. Getting in touch with it produces this enormous sense of well-being, enthusiasm for life. I would call it enthusiasm for adventure and exploration. A great peace and a joy as it did for the young boy under the oak tree. I got to tell you, as a mature male, and I consider myself a mature male, not mature, I'm mature, I am still set on fire by adventure, by exploration, by going into the unknown. Those are things that drive me. So that primal urge, that archetype, that power is still there. It's magical. It's empowering. And so these differing schools of psychoanalysis, Adler and Jung, believe it or not, they're both right. Each picks up on two different aspects of this energy. The one integrated and unified, and the other the shadowy side. And at the top of the triangular archetypical structure, way at the top, at the peak, the one integrated and unified is this divine child mixed with the shadow. The divine child who renews us, keeps us young at heart. You know, I'm pushing 60 and I say, gosh, there's days I feel old. And everybody goes, well, you're only as old as you think or feel or whatever. And I say, but I feel old at times, but not in my brain, okay? I think young. My body sometimes augments that. And so it's this view of knowing that at the top of the triangle structure is the divine child. That renews us, that keeps us young. At the base of the triangle, we experience what we call the high chair tyrant, the weakling prince. And we're almost at the end of our time, but I wanted to hit this today. What's the high chair tyrant? The high chair tyrant is epitomized by the image of little Lord Fauntleroy, sitting in his high chair, banging his spoon on the tray, screaming for his mom to feed him, kiss him, attend him. And like a dark version of the Christ child, he's the center of the universe. Others exist to meet his all-powerful needs and desires, but when the food comes, it often doesn't meet his specifications. It's not good enough. It's not right. It's not the right kind. I get this with Ellery all the time. I asked for butter on one piece of toast and peanut butter on the other, not peanut butter and butter on both. And so nothing's good enough. It's not the right kind. It's too hot. It's too cold. Too sweet. Too sour. So he spits it on the floor, throws it across the room, or as Ellery does, crosses her arms and walks away, harumphing. If he becomes sufficiently self-righteous, no food, no matter how hungry he is, will be adequate. And if his mom picks him up after falling or failing him so utterly and completely, he's going to scream, twist, reject her loving advances because they were not offered at exactly the right moment. My child does that to me, too. You didn't give me exactly what I wanted when I asked for it, when I was screaming for it. Now, I hate you. You get your children do that to you. My child tells me she hates me, and I go, yeah, okay. See you later when you need me. And so the high chair tyrant hurts himself with his grandiosity, the limitlessness of his demands, because he rejects the very things that he needs for life, food and love. And you know what? We are absolutely out of time. I'm going to pick this up tomorrow right where we left off. So, folks, I hope you're getting something good out of this. There is more to come. So sit tight. We're going into the weekend. I'll see you Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on the YouTube channel for It's Sunday. And then see you again on Monday. Have a good weekend.